There's all sorts of meanings behind it. But at 3 a.m., I was dog sitting a little Yorkie. He's very cute. And he just twirled in the bed, and I woke up and I was like, I need to write this book. I need to tell people about grief dreams. And I wrote the entire poem, and I went back to sleep, and I woke up the next morning and I was like, wow, this could really help people.
I'd like to welcome Katie Cosgrove to the beautiful side of grief. Katie, thank you for taking the time to have a chat with me today.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I'm so happy to be here.
Before we get into the big stuff, I read that you work in publishing, love to travel, take fabulous photos. And for anyone listening, go and check out Katie's Instagram account. It's called It's Katie Cosgrove. So go check that out. And she's got some beautiful photos on there. But my favorite is that you love to help dogs. What's that all about?
Yeah, I'm just a big dog lover. Especially the bigger the dog, the happier I am. I just love the big goony ones. And so I used to have a Tibetan Mastiff and had to leave her home when I moved across country. Yeah, she's a small bear. And so I really got used to that identity of being a dog mom. And when I moved across country, I missed her so much. So I started dog sitting. And so now I work with
Oh,
behavioral issue dogs, where people that don't normally trust other people to stay with their dogs now have somebody that they can trust.
yeah.
And I have a bunch of repeat clients that love me and I love them. So I just hang out with dogs all the time now. It's great.
Oh, I love that. And just like humans, really, aren't they? We need to just be loved and wrapped up and know that we're safe and secure and that we can trust the person we're with. And it's no different for animals either, is it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I got a
It's,
rescue cat after my daughter Tal
oh,
died. Yeah, because, that was the one thing. We just shifted into a new home and she was finally allowed to have a cat because we rented and many places didn't like you having animals when you rent. So finally we had a place she could have her cat. And of course she didn't get to have that happen. So I went to the SPCA over here in New Zealand and found this gorgeous little cat that was sitting in reception and it had been put there because the other cats were bullying it. I just fell in love with it. And then I said, oh, can I pick her up? And they said, she's a bit timid. She's, really scatty. So probably, well, she just let me pick her up and she hugged into me, had this beautiful hug with her, put it back. And I thought, well, I guess I'd better go and look at the other cats too. But she'd already stolen my heart. So
oh my
that's who I
gosh.
took home. And yeah, all she needed was some love.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful story and a beautiful tribute to your daughter.
Yes. Well, it's strange how it works out because I'm pretty sure that Tar would have been very instrumental in making sure that she was the one that I chose.
Hmm.
And yeah, so she's going, well, you're not doing this without me.
Right, exactly.
Now, Katie, I feel you and I are very like minded when it comes to grief because you have a company called Grief is Good. And I don't know how to tell you how happy that makes me feel when I hear that because I don't know about you, but sometimes when you go onto grief websites, and this is not to put them down at all, everybody's in their own space at their own time. But sometimes I feel like I could get stuck in those. And what you and I are doing, we are focusing on the beautiful, positive sides of it. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to bring that out, but I guess as we go along, we're just going to find the beautiful nuggets in what you do. So let's start with you experienced a whole raft of people dying on you between the age of what, 13 and 21, was it? In addition to your dad. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when I was 15 actually, I lost my dad to encephalitis of the brain, and after about a year and a half struggle with that. So that was hard because he became kind of a different person, and that he
Yeah.
was always very loving and kind, and he became almost had this evil energy to him, and that was really hard to watch. And then I lost somebody, like you said, every year after that up to age 21, including a pet. And this grief that I had compiled over the years, I wasn't doing anything with it. It was just sitting stagnant inside of me. And I was labeling it as depression and anxiety, through therapists and through hearing people at school and going to college. I was like, oh, I'm just adjusting to college. I'm depressed. I'll be
Yeah.
okay. And it wasn't until I had a grief dream about my dad that I realized that I hadn't been talking about him for 5 years of my life. And I spent this half of
Wow.
a decade avoiding my grief and avoiding discussing anybody that had passed because I found that it made other people so uncomfortable. And it was such a taboo subject around me personally. So it kind of opened my eyes to this idea of grief dreams and talking about your loved ones. So now that's my mission, is to talk about loved ones and make sure you're including them in your life still, because I spent so long not including my dad in my life, and that breaks my heart now.
Because they are such a huge, huge part of your life. When you
Hmm.
love somebody so deeply, you suddenly can't just go from one day to the next. They're here one day, gone the next, and you can't talk about them. I talk about my daughter all the time, and um, it's not that I don't care, but I really don't care about whether people want to hear or not, because there was just her and I for 17 years. So that was a big part of my life. And so I just, chuck her into the conversation, and I feel good because even though she's not here anymore, probably just like you, I feel very, very strongly connected to her still to this day. So I may not be seeing her physically, but definitely I feel her, and I feel her in my heart a lot. Is that what you feel with your dad? And tell us a little more about that dream. What was that dream telling you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is how I feel with my dad. I feel very connected with him now that I'm not scared to talk about him. I almost think it's so brave of you to talk about your daughter just openly, because for me, it took so much courage to get to just talk about him, just mention him in a conversation, even mention the word dad in
Mm.
plain conversation. And that grief dream, I was playing a concert in an auditorium, and he was in the auditorium in the dream. And I noticed him, and I got so excited that I put down my instrument. I stopped playing. I ran into the crowd and I hugged him. And it felt so good to hug him.
Oh,
And that was a magical feeling. And I have chills right now talking about it. But I woke up that next morning and instantly cried. It shocks you the first
yeah.
time you have a grief dream. And after I got over the crying, I kind of realized this beautiful side of grief, no pun intended,
Yes.
and how I could hug him still and experience things with him through my dreams. And it was just magical.
That is such a beautiful story. What a magical experience. I think, too, from what I've heard while I've been doing this and from my own experiences, is that when people are so deep in their grief, often they're unable to recognize signs our loved ones may be sending us. And so we don't see them, or we're looking for something specific. But I've also heard very much that when you dream of your loved one who's transitioned, that they are actually coming to you. That is a super real experience, and often they will guide you and give you tidbits of information, and that's so. Ah, that is so beautiful. So, is there a lot of your work focused on this dream, helping people firstly dream about their loved ones and then understand what that means,
I
how
would
that works?
Yeah, I would say that probably it's a little less than half of what I advocate for. I mostly
Mm,
advocate for just talking about your loved ones and healthy
yes.
grieving tips, accepting all of your feelings, talking about your feelings, feeling your feelings, that kind of thing. But also, grief dreams is a major passion of mine, and I'm just kind of stepping my foot into it and talking about that publicly on podcasts and such. And it's incredible because I didn't realize how taboo again that this topic was, because a lot of support groups won't touch grief dreams because it's almost bending on that spiritual aspect, and they don't necessarily know how to talk about that, so they just avoid the conversation altogether, or they don't want to be responsible for you know figuring out what the dream means, doing dream interpretation, whereas a therapist would be more helpful at that, so they just avoid it. And I think that we're really missing this opportunity to not only make new memories but and cherish them, but also explore what our loved ones are trying to tell us or what our subconscious is trying to tell us, depending on what you believe. Both are very valid. And I think that if we can just embrace this idea of grief dreams and embrace dreaming as a new reality, that we can really make these new memories and see it as something that we as sacred.
That really speaks to me, Katie, what you're doing, that work you're doing, because I agree with you 100%. We need your voice out there talking about this because when you experience it yourself, that transcends to others. They instinctively know that you know what you're talking about. And I think that's so important because a lot of it's about being able to trust people. And I don't know about you, but there seems to be this defined way that you're supposed to experience grief. And it's shut off in a lot of respects. I had a celebration of life for my daughter. She was so vivacious and she had so many gorgeous friends. And I didn't dress in black. I went out and bought a yellow dress of all things. Because, no, it was a white dress. No, sorry, a white dress with yellow daisies on it, white daisies with yellow centers
Oh,
and
I
a
love that.
yellow coverall over. I just felt, she was so alive. I could not dress in black for her, and that went against a lot of what people expected, and I think now what we have to do is actually embrace death, embrace it, talk about it, be involved in it. How do we want that to look like? And I know that you're very much into end of life, so we're going to get into that a little bit later because I think that's a big part of it too, because we can make that a very beautiful experience as well. But I think it's stepping out of all the societal beliefs about how we should manage grief. I think we're in a time now where we can do that. And you talk about the spiritual realm. Well, that's me through and through. I'm your girl when it comes to anything spiritual. And that is through my daughter because she let me know she died. She came to me straight away. So I had that connection whether I wanted to have it or not. So kudos to you for what you're doing. What else are you covering in the forms of communication, especially around young ones?
So I advocate for talking to children about their grief and about loved ones who have passed, especially the loved ones that they maybe didn't know.
Mhm.
Maybe it's a great grandparent and they're very detached from them, or they moved away when they were young so they don't know them very well. And I think it's so important to still say, mommy's sad right now. I think that it's so important to talk out to kids about people dying because kids understand. They can feel things like grief and depression from ages 6 and even sometimes recorded age younger than that. So
Yes.
I think that it's so important to talk to them, especially when parents are grieving and the kids necessarily aren't grieving, that say mommy's sad right now because she lost her grandma and she was really important to me because XYZ, and explain that to them and walk them through what that looks like and let them see you cry, because if they don't see that at a young age, they're not going to know how to deal with that when they get older. That's how they learn. They pick up our habits and our rituals, and by hiding away and only stopping the tears immediately and say, Mommy, why are you
Mhm.
sad? And say, I'm not, everything's okay. You're shielding them from some very important life lessons. So I think it's so important to be open with them because they can handle it. And kids are resilient and they're beautiful and they're smart. They're so smart.
Yes.
So doing that in a very gentle way is so important in my opinion.
Yes, I agree with you. I think we underestimate their ability to comprehend. And the thing is that they're seeing everything that's going on, they're feeling
Mhm.
all the tension and emotions in the room and that. And so, unless we're communicating to them what that's all about, they are forming their own interpretations about it, which could be really off the mark. And it opens up that conversation for how they may be feeling as well, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a book out there by Caitlin Doughty, and it's
Hmm.
called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? And it's a beautiful
Oh.
book. It's such a good book for kids because you realize, I mean, even as an adult reading it, I realized how many questions kids have about death when they're
Hmm.
told there's no holds bar, you can ask me anything you want, and they have some pretty amazing questions and realizations. And so I think it's just important to talk to them and open that conversation space.
And while we're on that subject, you have a beautiful resource center on your website, and it covers a few books by Caitlin as well. Because do you know what? I went and checked them out and I downloaded them. So, yeah. And that's how it works. I just think they're fabulous resources, and they're done in such a way that there's a lot of humor wrapped up into it. So it's not shrouded in sadness and things like that. What about for teenagers? Like you were 15 when your dad died, and not being able to speak about that and express how you were feeling. Did you have any friends around you that you could just speak to, or?
Unfortunately, my friend circle, I think, was the most uncomfortable with it. And I specifically remember I was in math class. It was my second period on the first day back after my dad had passed. So I'd taken about 5 or 6 days off and I went back to school that day. And we left math class, and this girl who I wasn't very close friends with, we actually sometimes didn't get along, came up to me and just walked side by side with me and said, "Hi." And I said, "Hi." And she said, "If you need the notes, I have them for you, but no worries if you don't need them." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then just walked with me, didn't say another word, didn't ask me how I was doing, did it. And that was such an incredible moment for me because I felt comfortable and I felt like there was somebody there to hold space for me, and I had the option to talk if I wanted to. And this idea of holding space for someone, I mean, that phrase gets thrown around a lot, but I I think that's a perfect example of doing that, is not forcing a conversation, not making themselves feel comfortable, but going through the uncomfortableness of it and allowing me to just be silent. And that was so
Yes,
incredible. And also,
yes,
I mean, listening to your teenagers if they're going through something like this is so important. The best thing my mom ever did was that same day I made it to about third or fourth period, and I went to the nurse's office and I called my mom and I said, I can't do it. I'm not ready. And she said, okay. And that was it. And she left work and came and picked me up, and we called the grief counselor that day. And that was so important to me because it felt like she had my back and that I wasn't forced to be doing something that I didn't want to or wasn't ready to do.
yeah, so important. My daughter was a teenager when she died. I was really mindful of all the teens, all her friends around there. And, I tried my best to just be that open home and place that they could just share what they were feeling or just be there, just however they wanted to do it. But the most beautiful thing I got out of that was that, like some of her schoolmates used to come around and they'd be sitting on the back terrace and it was freezing, but we'd all be cuddled up. And then the stories would come out, and the stories that I had never heard about what she was like at school and the things that she did. And gosh, I always knew that she was a natural born leader and she was pretty bossy in a nice way. And but then I heard her friends. I tell the story of one friend. He said to me, she if he didn't turn up to school, he lived quite close to the school. So she would march down to his house, say hi to his mum, march down to his bedroom, say, "You get up, get dressed, you're going to school." And then, he would do it. This big hulking guy would get himself up into school, and he would have to buy her lollies at lunchtime or something like that. But it was like I never got to hear that. She never mentioned that. And I just thought to myself, how beautiful. Those stories mean so much to me. So if we can create those safe spaces where people can just openly and honestly share how they're feeling, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it goes into this idea of making new memories with them, with the people that
Yes.
you've lost. And, telling stories is such a sacred thing because you're allowing someone else to share your memories. And for you, I can't even imagine how important that is to see the different facets of her life. And the same for my dad. I love when I hear death stories about my dad, and it makes me feel
Mm.
closer to him, and I have something new that popped up, and I love new things. It's like a
Yeah.
shiny object.
Yeah.
So I love it.
It, it's like when you find a video clip that you never knew about and you watch it and you go, oh my gosh. And it makes you realize, it feels like you've just been gifted the biggest thing ever when you get to
Exactly.
see that and they become such treasures. You think you have forever. And so I know with Tala and I, she was always taking selfies and that, but there weren't too many photos of her and I together. And then some of them were on her phone, which I didn't get access to all the photos there. So it's interesting. And I think in the here and now, make those memories, take those photos, crazy little things that you're doing and that, because they are priceless down the line, aren't they?
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason why I was a photographer for so long, because I didn't have a lot of photos of my dad. And so I became almost obsessed with this idea of preserving and documenting, to the point where my brother-in-law one time at Christmas was like, why do you always take so many pictures of me?" And I
Yeah.
was like, you're going to thank me one day, or your kids are going to thank me one day when they can look back at all these funny pictures of flowers in your beard and things.
Yeah. You mentioned the book, another book by Caitlin Doherty, From Here to Eternity. And you mentioned that that changed your life. How did that change your life?
So I was in college and I had been studying journalism, and it was right around the same time that I was waking up to the fact that I hadn't been dealing with my grief. And so I didn't like the way that grief was presented to me as a, you have to do it this way, or this is the way we deal with death. So I started taking religious studies classes and became a religious studies major. And through the religious studies, I really focused on death traditions and grief culture. And somebody introduced this book to me when I was at a bookstore traveling, and I read the whole thing on the plane back to Buffalo because I was so enthralled in this idea of there being other forms of grief and other traditions of death. And it just changed my whole perspective on how we're supposed to grieve, and the idea of, the funeral industry, and just the dichotomy between other parts of the world and westernized grief, and how it's in a box right now, and that box doesn't really allow us to feel all of our feelings sometimes or process in a healthy way.
Yes, that's so important because, I remember you interviewing somebody who spoke about the Mexican Day of the Dead. Oh gosh, what a beautiful way to honor your loved ones and allow them to come back, and all those little traditions and things like that. And there are many cultures where they celebrate their loved ones when they pass. And I actually was fortunate enough. I didn't even think about it. My daughter was coming home to me regardless, and so we had her at home for about 4 days before the funeral. Friends could just come by, and it was an open casket, so they could come by, sit with her if they wanted. Honestly, she had so much stuff left in her coffin, and friends wrote all over it, little messages. We bedazzled the bright pink coffin.
Oh my god.
And she had so many things left in it that the funeral director said, and now, Helen, we're going to have to remove some of these things because some of them are not safe. And I was like, okay. But it was just beautiful. I loved that people could have the opportunity because it was so sudden and so unexpected, and people couldn't believe it had happened. And actually being able to come to the home and sit with her and see it for themselves, I guess, was part of that acceptance of what had happened as well. It was a really difficult time, but it was also a really special time with all the people that, came by, and just to know that your loved one is surrounded by so many beautiful people, that just warmed my heart. I knew it, but to see it, ah, that was the best.
That sounds incredible.
Now, let's talk about how to live a good life with grief and embrace it, because that's what you help people to do. You don't ask them to damper it down or not acknowledge it. You just help them find a way that sits right with them, don't you? How do you do this?
So I think that first and foremost, it's feeling your feelings, whatever they are. A lot of people have so much guilt around grief because they're like, I don't feel anything, or I don't feel sad anymore, or I should be feeling sad, or I feel sad too often, or I'm not over it yet. And, or people, I think people are annoyed with me. There's all this kind of embarrassment and guilt surrounding grief in all different ways that I really want to hone in on the fact that all feelings are good feelings and that you're
Yes,
allowed to feel them and that you're allowed to take your time with them too and explore them. And one of my favorite ways to do this is to pick up your grief, to imagine it as something inside of you and pick it up and hold it. And what does it feel like? How heavy is it? What is it? Is it round? Is it sharp? Are there edges? Does it have writing on it? What color is it? And kind of explore this idea of your feelings being tactile, because if you can see them for what they are, you can accept them back into your body and know that that's a part of you. And so I
yes,
think that that's something that's really important. That's the first and foremost thing I focus on. And also, I would say that this idea of creating new memories and really focusing on rituals and traditions and developing those. I mean, my favorite example is on Father's Day. It always been a horrible holiday for me, and I feel so bad for my mom because I still have a living grandfather. And every Father's Day, my mom would have to do something for my grandpa. And so she would invite all of us over knowing that we were all going to be miserable all day. And
yeah,
I felt so bad for her because she knew that we're all going to be sad, but
yeah.
we all want to celebrate grandpa too. And so what I started, my boyfriend had actually lost his dad as well. So my boyfriend and I now have this tradition where we buy everything bagels for my dad and we burn them just a little bit the way he did and put cream cheese on them. And then even though my dad would never burn anything, they were always magically burnt. And we would get kiwis for his dad because he said whenever they didn't like something the way it tasted, he would say, "Oh, it tastes like a kiwi." So now we have this breakfast together where we make this big breakfast and we have orange juice and burnt bagels and kiwi, and we really celebrate Father's Day and it honors them. And to me, I'm so happy on that day now because I feel like I'm creating new memories and their legacy, and that I'm building my relationship with not only my dad, but also his dad, who I'd never met before. And it makes us feel closer. It makes us feel closer to our dads. It's just really great. So I think those are the major two things I focus on.
Yeah, that is so cool. What a great suggestion. So, I also have heard of people that found Thanksgiving and Christmas incredibly difficult. And so, what they would do is that they would travel to somewhere they'd never traveled to before and, like completely take them out of the home and all the things around them that they would normally have around that day and go and have a whole new experience. And they would take a part of their person with them, on these
Mhm.
trips and going exploring, and they had so much fun, and it's such a great way. You can do it however you want, whatever works for you guys, can't you? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's no rules when it comes to grief. And I love that you said that because think that a lot of people look down on that, and
Mm,
or they have some uncomfortable feelings with it, like, well, you have to be with your family on Thanksgiving or Christmas. And it's just, I can do what's good for me, and maybe
yes.
traveling is that.
Yes. And I think that when we allow ourselves to do that, when we allow ourselves to sit with what is good for us, then it ends up being what is good for everyone else, because I feel like that when we're sitting authentically with ourselves, being who we need to be, then that naturally just flows out and it's beautiful. And it gets rid of all that
Absolutely.
tension and friction and things like that. Yeah. So you have to explain to me what a trauma informed specialist is, because I've never heard of that before. So, are you able just to let us know what that is?
Absolutely. So, a trauma informed specialist is somebody who understands how to help people who have been through traumatic experiences. And
Mhm.
they do this in the way that we recognize their resiliency and their competency. And it's not necessarily a prescription approach where you have a problem and this is how we treat it. If you have a problem, why do you have that problem? Why is this a reoccurring problem? How can we address the root of the problem and see your resiliency through it and develop healthier habits through it so that you don't have this problem again in the future and we're not just putting a band-aid on it. And I thought that was such an important work for me because so many people that I'm going to be working with as I'm in school to be a death doula, and so many people that I'll be encountering will have past traumas and that maybe they'll be triggered by death or the end of life. And I think that it's so important for me to kind of have that background and have that training so that I can approach people calmly, and also a lot of the work that we're doing in trauma informed care and in school for end of life care is focusing on yourself. It's dealing with your own trauma first and your own biases, because you can't hold space for somebody if you're triggered or if you're dealing with some feelings.
Yes. Yes.
And that I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to have all these breakthroughs and deal with my feelings and open up old wounds to kind of heal them. And it's been a really incredible experience so far. And I do recommend the trauma informed care because it teaches you how to help somebody in crisis.
Oh, yes. Really valuable work you're doing there, Katie. And I am a great believer that trauma and grief often go hand in hand, because when you're in profound grief, that makes you so open, so raw, so vulnerable in that. And then any past hurts will naturally flow up to the surface and become a part of that. So it may be that, suddenly you feel really angry about this and you're thinking, oh, gosh, this person's just died. Why am I feeling angry? That's not an appropriate reaction or emotion, but it's true. And so that's why everybody's grief is going to look different. And that's why it all needs an individual approach to it. And yes, it sounds so wise what you're doing and so needed. I feel a lot of the work that we're doing today is trying to heal, past traumas, especially of our ancestors that have come down through our DNA, and I think it's a privilege to be able to do that, but often you have to go through a lot of hardship to understand that journey first, which is kind of the downer side of it. But then once you get through it, yeah, you're really in a position to make some headway. So keep up that beautiful work you're doing. I love that.
Thanks. I love it too.
Yeah. So what is a deaf doula? We don't have them here that I'm aware of, or I haven't come in
Yeah, so a
contact with
death
them.
doula, it mimics kind of what a birth doula does. It's a non-clinical role to help expand the comfort and care that other modalities are doing. So a hospice can only check in on every once a week for an hour or 2 hours, whereas a death doula can spend all day with you. So it's really expanding that care in a way that's more holistic. So they're helping you get your paperwork
Mhm.
together. They're assessing whether you're comfortable, and maybe you have a lot of agitation and the nurse wants to prescribe medication to reduce that agitation. But really what's agitating the person is that the back of their sweatshirt is all bunched up, or their pillow is too soft, or they're laying down too far and they need to be sitting up more. So reducing that agitation, it can help with a lower amount of medication and making sure that that person is just more comfortable. And also it's the care for the family. if somebody's arguing, my mentor always uses this example of, if somebody's arguing in front of the person who may be unconscious, letting them know, like, hey, they can hear you. And if they, even if they maybe can hear you, you don't want them hearing this. Like, can we step out in the hall? And just making this a safer space for somebody to have a more dignified death. And that's really what it's all about for me. It's this idea of a dignified death, of we have a right to have such a beautiful death because it can be beautiful transition. And a lot of people have the opportunity to have a beautiful death, but they don't necessarily know how to do that. So that's what my work will be focused around as a death doula.
You'd be perfectly matched for that. Just got this beautiful, calm, serene, nurturing presence around you. So I can just imagine you stepping into people's homes and the sense of calm just reigning and like, phew, you're here, thank you. And it's such an important role because, like you say, it's this whole thing about death and dying and grief and that we tend to just want to push under the bed and not think about it. Yet it's so important to have those conversations and make sure you've captured all those beautiful memories and stories and say all those things that often we don't say to people. I'm a great believer in that if you love somebody and you care about somebody, go and tell them that you love them and give them this big, huge hug and let them know that you really care, because we assume that people just know that stuff. And anything can happen tomorrow. Try and let bygones be bygones. Forgiveness is not about forgiving the other person for what they did. It's forgiving yourself and just allowing yourself to sit with that and let it pass.
No, it's a
Okay,
great
sorry about
reminder. I love it. I love it all.
that.
I wanted to say that.
Yeah, I love
Oh,
your passion.
I could
Yeah,
talk
I
to you
love
all
your
day.
passion for end of life care. So that was one of my questions, was about how we can make death more dignified for someone. So share with us, you've got something very special happening right now. You've just released your book. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. So my book is called I'll See You in Your Dreams Tonight, and it's a children's book for really any age, but I market it about ages 3 to 10. And it's a poem that walks you through this idea that we can create new memories and involve our loved ones through storytelling and dreams. And so it's meant to inspire kids who are grieving and give them a little bit of hope and comfort, instead of having this very permanent thing be so scary and overwhelming. Now they can see grief dreams, and it gives them something to look forward to. So there's actually a journal coming soon of a grief dream journal, which will help them record their dreams. So if they're not having grief dreams, they can start to record them, and that will kind of trigger these dreams to start happening more often, and they, or at least remembering them more often. And so the book is incredible. I love it. I've gotten great feedback on it, and the launch was beautiful. So I'm so excited to have it out in the world.
How can people get hold of it?
So it's on Amazon, and you can also find a link to it as at griefisgood.com.
Great. Okay, so I will have all those links in the episode notes and with your bio so people can go and check it out there. So that's really good. But I also read that you woke up from sleep and wrote this book.
Yes, at 3 a.m., which is a peculiar time, but not really. If you know a little bit about grief, you know that 3 a.m. is the wake up call for the spiritual realm. And
Hmm.
between 3 and 5 a.m., that means if you're waking up, that means you're dealing with something grief related, or there's some spirit trying to contact you. There's all sorts of meanings behind it. But at 3 a.m., I was dog sitting a little Yorkie. He's very cute, and he just twirled in the bed, and I woke up and I was like, I need to write this book. I need to tell people about grief dreams. And I wrote the entire poem, and I went back to sleep, and I woke up the next morning and I was like, wow, this could really help people. And I put it through my channels, and everyone seemed to agree. And I asked a couple therapists because I was worried about it maybe not being copacetic to healing, and they were like, no, this is what people need, kids need this. And so I wrote the book and had it illustrated, and I had an incredible amount of support through it, and it's been just an incredible journey overall. Thank you.
Congratulations on getting it out there to help the world and to help our young ones. I just think that, whatever we can do with our little ones, our young ones, is got to pay off and be rewarding in the future. You nurture them and you nurture our future. That's how I see it. So, what else are you up to?
Oh my gosh, I am traveling. I'm moving back to Buffalo, New York. And so I live as a nomad. So we're kind of staying still for a little bit. And I am just in my classes becoming a death doula, working on Grief is Good, starting a newsletter for grief tips and focusing on beautiful things within the grief world that are happening, like a different type of burial service where you can become a tree and composting burial and all these crazy things. Oh, don't even get me started
Oh,
on that.
I want to interview somebody on that because I've read all about it.
It's so
It's
interesting. I love it.
Oh, I know people look at you and their eyes go wide. They go,
Yeah.
"What?" But it's done in such a cool way, isn't it? Yep.
And it's
Okay.
sacred. I mean, you're giving back to the earth and you're growing something, and it's just I love the idea of it. It's how I want to go. But so I'm just kind of poking around in this little grief and death world and trying to help. That's really what I'm up to.
I think you're doing a great job at it as well. We're just going to start wrapping things up, and there's something that I always ask people when they come onto my show. Several questions. So, what is the best thing that has happened to you today?
The best thing that has happened to me today is talking to you. Actually,
Oh,
I get a little anxious before podcast interviews, but you're so lovely, and this idea of forgiveness and forgiveness now and forgiveness being about us, not the other person, you're forgiving yourself. That really resonated with me, and it's something that I'm going to take home tonight and maybe write a couple letters
oh,
and forgiving, younger Katie for certain things, because I think it's such a beautiful concept and so, so important.
yeah. I know that that was a turning point for me in my life because I was holding on to stuff that I just would not let go, and it was not healthy. And so it was Oprah Winfrey.
That's awesome.
I remember her talking about forgiveness, and it just went ding, 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 ding. And I went, oh my gosh, that is such an amazing way to look at it. And that's what I'm going to do from here on in because it is so positive and so healthy. That's great. What is something that you are most grateful for?
I'm most grateful for my dad, actually. So
Yeah.
I know that you could probably resonate with this, but I'm so grateful for him leaving at the time that he did, because I mean, it's a little different than your situation because he was sick for a time and he was a different person. So I had actually had anticipatory grief and lost him a lot earlier than when I physically
Yeah.
lost him. But I'm grateful for losing him because it made me who I am, and it made me see this light and this path that I have to walk and help people. And I don't necessarily know if I would have found that without his help.
Oh, 100% agree with you. I would not be here doing this podcast if it
Yeah.
weren't for the experience I had with my daughter
I
and that
have to
being so uplifting.
I have to tell you, you posted something a couple months ago and you said, the person I was died when you died. And that was so profound to me because I was like, yes, exactly. And I became this new person with this new passion and new ideas. And it
Yeah.
made me so grateful for that. And I'm very happy to find someone who can resonate with that.
I told you, we're kindred spirits.
Yes.
Yeah, gosh, yes. The last thing, when you're having moments in your day, we have this expression here, when you have moments that turn to custard, how do you pivot out of those? Because they're going to exist no matter what.
Yeah, I would say that I focus on my competency and resiliency. I think about all of the hard things that I've been through and think, how did I get through those? And specifically, there's this one memory I have of my grandmother's funeral, and my uncle was doing the eulogy, and it was so beautiful. And she was such a matriarch, it was such a matriarchal figure in our family. And I felt so empowered in that moment, like, wow, my grandma gave me this power. I have this power inside of me. And so when I get really flustered throughout my day or when things aren't going right or I'm dealing with anxiety or I'm just sad, which happens a lot, I think about this power that I have inside of me and how grateful I am for it and how much of a blessing it is to have that. And it really helps me kind of power through and think like, oh, this email that I have to send isn't so bad.
Yeah, that is it. And you've mentioned it too, the power of losing somebody who we love so, so deeply and how it's transformed our lives. I always say that I am a better person here and now than I ever was before Tal died. And that seems weird to say, but it's because she's taken me on this incredible journey of understanding myself, being at peace with myself, really knowing that everything I need is within me and the power of that. And that is such a beautiful place to get to. And I'm so excited for you because you are still so, so young. So you've got this lifetime ahead of you being able to spread that beautiful love and knowledge and wisdom inside of you to others. And yeah, that excites me.
Thanks.
What would you like to leave our listeners with? What thoughts?
I want to tell them that if they're not having grief dreams, that to start a journal and start writing down their dreams because it can help you remember them more easily. And if you don't be worried if you're not having them or if you haven't had one yet, they will come. They will visit you or maybe ask for that. Say that out loud. Be like, I would like you to visit me in my dreams and see what happens. You never know. And also to create these new memories and new rituals and traditions about your loved ones to honor them because it's so important to keep them active in your life and start telling stories of them and make sure that your expectations are in check because you might make people uncomfortable. So know that you if you tell this story they might say, oh, I'm so sorry, and you have to respond to that and say, no, it's okay, it's okay, like they were meant to go at their time and I'm okay. And just developing some sort of something that feels good to respond to that. And I would say that those three things are so important in the grief process, and it can make your grief really beautiful and a sacred process.
Oh, gold, 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 gold. Can I just expand on something that you just said? How do you advise people who are in the midst of grief and they've just lost their partner or child or something like that? And there's somebody that has said something, oh, I know how you feel. I just lost my grandma. She was in her 90s, and I know how you feel. Some people get really angry with those types of comments. And, for me, I look at them as that they're always well meaning. That's the only reference that person can relate to. And so that's what they're bringing forth into this conversation, even though it doesn't seem relevant and it's a completely different thing. What is your take on that?
I completely agree with you. I think that it's just focusing on it's not personal to you. It feels personal and it feels like a dagger when somebody says that, but I would say that remembering that they're just trying to comfort you and that they're trying the best that they can, and that grief is really hard for some people. And you've said
Mm,
awkward things too. A lot of
mm.
times when my personal, the least favorite thing that somebody could say to me is time heals all wounds, and we all have our things. But when somebody says that, I get so angry at them, saying, like, no, it doesn't. My wound was never healed. And I want to shout it from the rooftops. But I learned that they're just uncomfortable, and that's what they've been told to say. And that I can't be angry at them. I can be angry at the society that's built this idea of grief and how uncomfortable it is. But I can just love them through it and say, and maybe even say, like, I think it's a little bit different situations, but I appreciate your love and kindness and trying to relate to me. It means so much to me for you to be here. And then kind of pivot, and you might strike them off guard, and they might be a little uncomfortable with that statement, but it it's important, and it's important for you to speak your piece too.
That's a great piece of advice. Yeah, I used to see people that would look at me and you could see that they were struggling so hard to find the words. And I would say, don't say anything, let's just hug. Because you know what? The hug, it's heart to heart. You feel the love, you just know that they're there with you. And sometimes there are no words to describe what has happened, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And let's not try to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. So, yes. Oh, Katie, you are such a divine soul. Oh my gosh, you're a gift to us. And it's just been such a privilege to have this conversation with you, to hear about what you're doing. Congratulations again on that book you've just released that I will have all the links to in the episode notes. All the very, very best with your travels and getting to New York safely and getting set up and then enjoying your time there. And not to mention those dogs.
The
Keep doing up
dogs.
that wonderful work as well. So, yeah, I just wish you all the very, very best, Katie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got some real value from this episode. If there's a topic you'd like covered, click on the Beautiful Side of Grief at gmail.com link, or go into the beautifulsideofgrief.com website, where you can also leave a review. To get notified of new episodes, hit the subscribe button. And if you know of somebody who could benefit from this episode, please share. And until next time, please be kind to you and take good care.